Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I rise today to begin the opposition's contribution to the state's recently handed down budget. Mr Speaker, it is the nature of these speeches that they can, from an opposition's point of view, be quite negative. So I wanted to begin by highlighting some of the things within the budget that I certainly support. On behalf of the community that I represent, on behalf of the party that I lead, and I believe on behalf of South Australia, because you can't have a budget of such a quantum without aspects of it that are positive, that should be positive, and that should be celebrated and championed and supported by both sides of Parliament. There are a number of things I want to highlight specifically in that field. The $6.2 million for additional road safety campaigns in the face of one of the most heartbreaking road tolls in South Australia for many years. Likewise, the $3.8 million for the Rider Safety Reform Programme to support motorcycle riders to travel on our roads in a more safe fashion, because we know that far too many motorcycle riders are losing their lives on South Australian roads. Speaking as a local member, I was heartened to see the $494,000 included in the state budget for the licensing scheme to be implemented for the ultra-high-powered vehicles in our state. A direct response to the tragedy that befell the Naismith family, who I am proud to represent in this place, and who were told by the previous government, of which I was part of, that something like this was probably not possible. I think that's a lesson to all of us, that bureaucrats can be challenged, and we need to lead from this place, because change can be implemented on behalf of the community. And I was proud to see the government take up that initiative as an election commitment, not only pass the laws in this place, but also back it up with a small but meaningful financial contribution in the state budget. I want to congratulate the government for the implementation of the Office of AUKUS, such an important generational initiative, which I have made clear that my side of politics will give bipartisan support for at every possible step of the way. That's why, as well as an Office for AUKUS, we would certainly like to see a committee of this Parliament established. We're not seeking to have a majority on that committee by any means, but we would love to see the government agree to that, for the formation of that committee. The motion is before Parliament at the moment. There will be another opportunity to vote for its formation later this week, and I do hope that the government will follow on from the creation of the Office for AUKUS by supporting that initiative that we have in the House at the moment, in the spirit of bipartisanship around such an intergenerationally significant project in South Australia. The Premier has said that AUKUS will last beyond the life of his government, beyond the life of future Liberal governments, back to Labour governments, back to Liberal governments, and as a consequence, that wholehearted and consistent bipartisanship is so well needed. We will support the Office for AUKUS, but we hope it goes far beyond that as well. We support the continued funding of the Startup Hub at Lot 14. That's $20 million over 4 years, providing support, mentoring, grants and a coming together of our state's startup community at Lot 14 so that we can be the startup state. I believe that the state government has a vision for that. I hope they do. And that has a sense of bipartisanship built around it as well. And I do wish that Startup Hub and every single person who participates in it, every single entity that participates in it, all the success, because their success is South Australia's success. We support the fact that this budget included some relief for first home buyers in the form of the removal of stamp duty on new homes and builds under $650,000. Time will tell if that goes far enough, and it's certainly welcomed by South Australia's construction industry and will be welcomed by many first home buyers. I don't believe it does go far enough necessarily. The terms around that might be just a little too constricted to provide significant relief beyond a few thousand lucky first home buyers. But let's hope the government is open to evaluating that programme, ascertaining its effectiveness, and seeing if it is going far enough to help South Australians into property ownership, because to own one's own home must be part of the Australian dream. We cannot let home ownership drift beyond the possibility of current generations or future generations. To be able to own one's home should be an aspiration for most Australians from childhood, and I hope the government is open to continuing to evaluate and potentially move the goalposts on that commitment, should it not be delivering exactly what is needed. Mr. Speaker, there are many elements of this budget that the party that I lead will speak in support of. I'm sure my colleagues on this side of the House will make contributions over the coming sitting days where they will highlight things they were pleased to see. But of course, there are a number of areas where we think the government has missed the mark. This budget has built into it an extremely concerning level of fiscal ill-discipline. We know that it has missed the mark in terms of delivering a surplus, and in fact the deficit of almost $250 million sets this state up for some significant fiscal uncertainty into the future. The way that government budgets, not just one or two government budgets, blew their budgets and then had those budget blowouts baked into their budgets going forward, has rewarded bad behaviour, ill management by bureaucrats and the ministers who they report to. We know that the state's budget, if you look across all the government departments, the overspend was over $1.3 billion. That has essentially been forgiven and baked into the budget going forward. So the incentive for government agencies to do the right thing in terms of managing their budgets into the future has been removed by this government, and that discipline may just disappear altogether in future with the current crop of bureaucrats. If I was a chief executive who had one of the smaller overspends, I would probably feel quite bad about that, because now I've got a smaller overspend baked into my new budget as opposed to some of the larger ones. It's worth just reflecting on some of those overspends. $387 million in the Education Department. $754 million in the Department for Health and Wellbeing, $66 million in the Department of the Premier and Cabinet, $43 million in the Primary Industries portfolio, and $54 million in the Department for Environment and Water, which has a budget of $301 million to start with, so an exceptionally concerning overspend there. And if we use the Department for Environment and Water as a case study looking forward, $54 million has been added to that $301 million. So the future budget has been has essentially had that baked into it, and ill discipline has been rewarded. Mr. Speaker, when the Treasurer and the Premier sell this budget, one of the key lines that they have been using, one of the case studies they have been using, which has been picked up by some people, and including some in the business community, and perhaps even applauded, is that we're doing good because we're not doing as bad as Victoria. Now, I hardly think that comparing ourselves favourably with the failing socialist republic to the east is a badge of honour. Thank goodness we are better than them. Thank goodness for South Australians. Thank goodness for South Australian businesses. Thank goodness for South Australian property investors. Thank goodness for those who are trying to get ahead in this state, that we are not as bad as the Andrews government in Victoria. I am relieved on behalf of all South Australians that that is the case, but that is not the measure that we should be trying to use as our benchmark for success. We can do much better than that. The Malinauskas Labor government can do much better than that, and to compare ourselves to Victoria is not a badge of honour. Every single thing that we should do every single day in this state should be trying to be better than Victoria, whether it is sport, whether it is business, whether it's government, but they are not the benchmark for success, and they never should be. Mr. Speaker, I want to move through some areas of where we have specific concern and then move into the areas of focus that the party that I lead will be taking in the coming months and years when developing a policy agenda as we move through this term. We talk a lot about healthcare in this place. The member for Schubert, the member for Frome, and many other members on this side of the House, but those two members in particular, speak regularly about the Labour Party's headline election commitment. They were going to fix the ramping crisis. We've heard that many, many times. And we know that although there has been record spending in the healthcare system, record amounts handed down in this budget and future budgets, there is still a downward trajectory when it comes to the measurement of healthcare success across almost every measure in this state at the moment. When we think of Labour's management of the healthcare system, we should reflect on the past. The party that closed the Repat Hospital, the party that brought us Transforming Health, the party that built the new Royal Adelaide Hospital with an emergency department that we know was not fit for purpose and has exacerbated ramping since the day it opened. In fact, the Labour Party in South Australia are the architects of ramping, and I suspect they will continue to be the architects of ramping for many years to come. Interestingly, when we look through the budget papers for the forthcoming financial year, where they have promised to deliver a modest surplus, they have also promised to cut spending in the health department by almost the quantum of that modest surplus. Now, I'm not sure if there is any time in recent memory when the health budget has diminished in a financial year, and so we don't hold our breath for that to be achieved. And perhaps we shouldn't, because if we want to see that world-class health system, if we want to see the ramping crisis resolved, if we want to see our emergency departments not be full of patients waiting for beds in a month like this month, when every other day almost every other day we've had a cold white across our metropolitan hospitals, maybe we shouldn't hope for that cut for our healthcare system. Maybe we should hope for more effective spending in a way that delivers the system-wide reform that our healthcare system needs in South Australia, not another aid solution before moving to the next fad that comes out of Focus Week, if we ever hear what comes out of Focus Week, Mr. Speaker. The health care system in South Australia has fallen off a cliff since Labor came to office. They have delivered record spending and they have delivered record ramping, and I think it takes a special type of incompetence to manage that.
Shame.
One of the things that is so lacking from this budget, Mr. Speaker, is a central vision for economic development for South Australia. Where is South Australia's economy going? What do we want for South Australia's economy? What are the jobs of the future and how are we going to get there? What are those industries which have served this state well for decades or centuries, and how are we going to make sure that they continue to deliver for this state in a way that they have done for generations? When we were in government, and I don't think that my job is to continually to look back to the 4 years we were in government. But one thing that I do want to highlight is Growth State. Growth State was a really clear economic agenda co-designed in partnership with industry and industry bodies. There had been a huge amount of thought went into Growth State. Many of the areas where South Australia had traditionally done very well, again for generations, in terms of what our state's economy was all about and how we could continue to sustain that and take it to the next level. But equally, Growth State had a relentless focus on future industries as well. It had 9 sectors: international education, defence, space, high-tech, health and medical industries, food, wine and agribusiness, tourism, energy and mining, and the arts and the creative industries. These areas created a sharpness in terms of where the government was going to focus our efforts, our support, our desire to partner with industry to deliver innovations and take those sectors to the next level. They were the sectors that we wanted to frame our state when we pitched to the world about what this state was all about when it came to business and economic development. This budget, well, we know the last budget walked away from Growth State. I think it was one of those situations where a new government comes in and they just throw out the economic vision because it belonged to the previous government, because it was put together by the previous government. But Growth State wasn't put together by the previous government. Growth State was a partnership between the previous government and industry. Business was at the table. Business representative bodies were at the table. We had spoken to people in our trade partners overseas. Trade offices had been involved in designing Growth State. Growth State was our pitch to our state, to the nation and to the world regarding South Australia's business and economic development DNA. And I think our state is lesser for not having that economic clarity in the budget. It's one thing to have a budget that is framed around healthcare and housing, and that's what the government wants this budget to be framed around, and those are worthy things. We welcome that. But if you don't have a vision to pay for the healthcare and housing through continued economic development in this state and a way of turbocharging the growth around those 9 platforms of Growth State, I do fear for the future of our state's economy. Those sectors are the sectors of South Australia's future, and now they are fragmented. They are fragmented across the cabinet. They don't have ministerial leads anymore. The economic vision that this budget contains, if you can find any economic character within the budget at all, the vision is almost entirely focused on pet projects. One of the answers the Premier continually gives when he's asked for his economic vision for the state is the hydrogen jobs plan. It's also the answer they give when they're asked about their energy vision for the state. It's also the answer they give when they're asked about their environmental vision for the state. In some ways, The Hydrogen Jobs Plan is a very small experimental project, an experimental project within an embryonic industry. Now, I believe that hydrogen is a fuel of the future, and I believe that South Australia has a big role to play in delivering that fuel of the future, both in Australia and globally. But we can't put all our eggs in the Hydrogen Jobs Plan basket. I wish them well with the Hydrogen Jobs Plan as they contort an election commitment into an economic reality. And good luck to Rick Morris and his team as he whips that one together. Sam Crafter, that's the other bloke, one of the highest paid public servants in the state. He's doing well out of the Hydrogen Jobs Plan. I'm not sure about many other South Australians, but he's doing well. He's a one-man economic stimulus. But the Hydrogen Jobs Plan will not deliver everything for this state. We wish them well, but we are yet to be convinced it is not simply a frolic that will waste. Is it 500 million? Is it $1 billion? Is it $1.5 billion? We know the power station, or the proposed power plant, has now been changed in terms of its scope, and the storage element has been withdrawn from it. We don't know if it'll plug into the system effectively. We don't know if there's enough water to create the hydrogen. So good luck to them as they develop the hydrogen industry in South Australia. That is an important industry, but we have to be more than just that. We need to be looking at international education, defence, space, high-tech, health and medical industries, food, wine and agribusiness, tourism, energy and mining, and the creative industries. That was growth state, and we cannot forget the importance of those industries. As we move through this term, the opposition will be increasingly talking about the importance of tax reform. We need state-based taxes to raise revenue in this state, but we must constantly be looking to see if the way those taxes are set, the way that those taxes are evolved, are meeting the purposes both from a revenue-raising point of view, but also are they positioning South Australia to be competitive nationally at the moment. As I said a moment ago, we welcome the removal of stamp duty for first home buyers for new builds and new homes up to $650,000. We welcome that small change to the way stamp duty will be administered for the coming years. But where else can we go with our tax reform in this state? I was delighted earlier in the year to appoint the Honourable Heidi Girolamo, MLC, as the Shadow Minister for Finance and Tax Reform, to take a leadership role in looking at where South Australia's taxes should be at the moment, working alongside the Shadow Cabinet and particular Shadow Treasurer Matthew Cowdery to look at opportunities for making our taxation system better in South Australia, making it work for all South Australians, and particularly making sure that our tax regime in South Australia is structured in such a way that it ensures that we are a competitive state moving forward, and not having Victoria as the benchmark regarding what competitiveness looks like. Heidi and her team have already pulled together a tax reform working group with a whole range of industry representatives and experts to start providing that thought leadership around tax reform in this state. And they'll look at stamp duty, the emergency services levy, payroll tax, land tax, water bills, because water bills in some ways are a tax, and we fear that the forthcoming regulatory determination for SA Water's bills going forward could create an opportunity, like they did last time Labour were in government, to be a major cash cow for the state government's bottom line. So Heidi and her team are going to be looking at this on an ongoing basis, and we'll have a lot to say over the coming months and years about where South Australia's tax regime should be headed. We'll also have a great deal to say about skills in South Australia. We have a skills shortage. Some of that can be attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic and the particular global challenges that created, the drop-off with regard to migration for a couple of years. And that's put South Australia's business community and skills in significant in a situation of significant challenge when it comes to meeting our skills needs in this state. It's firmly my view, though, that Labor are failing on responding to providing, in terms of providing South Australia with the skilled workforce that we need for our future. In many ways, they are falling back on their same old ways. Between 2012 and 2018, South Australia had the worst training system in the nation, presiding over significant declines over a 6-year period. Labor today will not commit to delivering increases in training participation. Rather, they seem to be focused on feel-good advertising campaigns, billboards about skills, newspaper advertisements, but not necessarily a lot around actually hands-on intervention to the skills market to be able to make sure we have the right people in the right places to do the right jobs. And this is something that, as I travel around the state, and it's a big problem in Adelaide, but the further I get away from metropolitan Adelaide, the greater the problem comes. We just do not have the skills in South Australia at the moment to meet the needs out there. The government have their technical colleges, and I think the jury's out on those. Are they just a slogan going back to a term that was used historically? And a lot of people know what a technical college is, and a lot of South Australians benefited from technical colleges in the past, and we will certainly see what those technical colleges deliver. But I think the intervention is required, and the support that is required is probably far more than 5 technical colleges scattered around the state. We'll watch that exceptionally closely. But our skills development industry in this state is in need of significant, ongoing, and importantly, consistent assistance so that we can get our apprentices and trainees into the right jobs with the right skills. I believe incredibly strongly in the value of apprentices. I saw what the member for Unley did with his single-minded, relentless, sometimes painful focus in Cabinet in terms of when he was the minister to drive our take-up of apprentices across the state. And when he was a minister, he got results. And because of his time as a minister, we have more people doing apprenticeships today in South Australia than we otherwise would.
20,000.
20,000 more, in fact. And how good is that? As the son of a retired carpenter, someone who grew up ignoring every occupational health and safety rule in the book, running around on building sites when my dad was supposed to be looking after us, I believe so strongly in supporting apprentices. Not only inspiring people to take up apprentices and inspiring people to see that as a credible career pathway, but also providing wraparound support throughout the life of the apprentice. Particularly during the first couple of years, when dropout rates can be up to 50%. We need support for the mental health of apprentices. We need support to ensure that our apprentices have the right tools for the trade and can afford those. And that's something that I'll be exploring and doing a lot more work with particularly the Deputy Leader and my broader team over the coming months and years. I actually think South Australia's economic future can be apprentice-led, and our skills crisis can be overcome by leaning into the world of apprentices, keeping more people in apprenticeships and supporting private businesses to take on apprentices. And I think there is a great opportunity for this state to lead the nation with regard to that. Linked to our skills challenges is our need to make sure that we're bringing in the right migrants to South Australia. As I often say, with an accent like mine, you can't be anti-migration, and I am quite the opposite. I think our doors should be open to get the right migrants in the right places in this state. But migration is a highly competitive field. We compete with other states, but we're also competing with the world. We're competing with Canada in particular, with New Zealand, and with the USA. All those countries are facing, and many others, are facing similar challenges to us, and as a consequence are pitching themselves as a desirable place for migrants to go. It's a competitive field, and while migration sits largely in a policy sense with the federal government, actually states do have a real role there. States have a role to be part of that competitive environment and to be pitching to potential migrants in other parts of the world that this is a great place to live, this is a place where you will get a job, and this is a place where you will be welcomed to build a great life. And I think that we need to, as a state, and I think this is something that we should do in a bipartisan way, we should pitch to other places in the world the values of coming to South Australia, what makes life good in South Australia and how you get there. People often ask me why we live in Adelaide, why my family lives in Adelaide. They expect some sort of romantic notion. We live here because it was the easiest state to move to, because it had regional migration status, and in the late 90s and the early 2000s there were a number of things about migrating to South Australia that made our state one of the easier places in Australia to move to. We still have some of those advantages. We don't have them all, and there is a place for the state government to lobby the federal government, but to pitch to the world that this is the place to move to. That's why I am the leader of the opposition in South Australia today, because my family found it easy to move to a place we'd never heard of, the city of Adelaide, and I'm glad that we did. Mr. Speaker, energy policy is particularly important in South Australia. Energy prices are soaring. That is putting massive additional pressure on households in the face of a range of other rising costs, whether that's interest rates, the price of fuel, the price of groceries. We also know it's putting massive pressure on small business. I was speaking to a small business at about 8 a.m. this morning about the challenges that they are facing paying a range of their bills, but the one that they mentioned first, and they had a go at me when they were serving me their coffee. They said, "What are you doing about our energy bills, David?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing my budget reply speech, so I'll mention you in it." So Josh, who is the owner of Cream on Jetty Road at Brighton, this is your special mention, and my staff will clip this and send it to you. And he does a great coffee to start the day. I also had eggs, toast and a hash brown this morning, because after he said that about his costs, I thought I'd better contribute a little bit more to him. However, I never normally have breakfast as a practitioner of intermittent fasting. But anyway, we have the highest energy prices in the nation. And in a couple of days' time, with the arrival of the 2022-2023 financial year, our energy prices will surge by up to 30%. And that is going to be extremely difficult for many small businesses and households to absorb. Energy policy is crucial in Australia, Mr. Speaker. Other nations look at us and think that we really have no excuse, given our natural resources, both in terms of renewables and non-renewable resources, for the energy crisis that seems to be enveloping our nation at the moment. This side of the House, in a bipartisan way, has supported a climate policy in this state in one way or the other for a couple of decades as we've transitioned towards clean, green renewables. South Australia's opportunities in this regard are immense, and we should be proud of what this state has done across both political parties since the turn of this century, not just at state level, but also federally. But we can't create a situation in this nation or in this state where wealthier people living in the inner city can dictate what our energy policy looks like, where while the further we get from the CBD, the harder and harder it becomes for people to keep their lights on and keep their homes warm in winter. I really worry that if we don't start having some vision and creativity with regard to energy policy, we are going to drift into a space where people in suburbs like Trott Park and Shido Park that I represent are going to struggle to keep their homes warm over winter, or are going to decide not to put their cooling on over summer. We could end up with a energy-based underclass in this nation if we don't get energy policy right. And unfortunately, I think largely through ideology driven by the federal Labour government, we are heading into a very scary place with energy policy. I believe we need to have an open mind with regard to all energy solutions that are available in Australia at the moment. But what we need particularly is an open mind when it comes to that transition to net zero. And increasingly, South Australia may be an exception from time to time, but increasingly there is a view that without having the nuclear fuel cycle as part of the energy mix, the dream of net zero simply will not be possible for many Western jurisdictions. I say that South Australia may be an exception because we do know that there are days now when we have 100% renewable power penetration, but I suspect that dream is almost impossible for the rest of the nation if we want to maintain our economic trajectory, if we want to maintain affordable energy, and if we want to maintain energy security. It may very well be that consideration of nuclear energy in some form, likely small modular reactors, will be necessary. We know that the South Australian Chamber of Mining and Energy undertook in the middle of last year a community consultation to discuss what South Australians thought about moving in this direction, at least having the conversation. And there was a majority of South Australians interested in having the conversation. It didn't mean a majority of South Australians were open to having nuclear power established in this state, but they were open to the conversation. And I think we've got to be open to the conversation in 2023 if we are serious about that transition for our nation and having leadership in the energy space within our nation. It is now 7 years and 1 month since Kevin Scarce handed down the Royal Commission findings into the nuclear fuel cycle inquiry that he undertook as the Royal Commissioner. A lot has changed in the world since May 2016 when he handed down those recommendations, both in terms of the desire of the world and this nation to move quickly towards net zero, in terms of the security outlook of the world from a defence point of view. And of course, nuclear-powered submarines are now proposed to be built in Adelaide, and that could very well change the direction of thinking around this area as well. It will certainly change the way that we behave with regard to the presence of nuclear material in South Australia and the range of security requirements that will be required, the range of skills that will be required. So perhaps it is the time to reopen that Royal Commission again, have a Royal Commission 2.0, and start thinking about what South Australia's role could be in that fuel cycle. Some 7 years since we last considered it. 7 years is a long time when it comes to innovation and technology, and now could be the time to start having that conversation again. I think that conversation should be bipartisan, and this is something that the Liberal Party in South Australia is certainly willing to offer a bipartisan level of support towards the conversation. And it is just the conversation at this time. But with the level of uranium deposits in this state, with nuclear-powered submarines being likely built within a decade or so in South Australia under AUKUS, now could be the time to have a considered conversation with the business community, with people from all walks of life in South Australia about what our role is with regard to the nuclear fuel cycle going forward. Mr. Speaker, one thing that was very apparent to me as a gap in the budget was support for our police service. There are some particular challenges facing the South Australian Police at the moment, an organisation that did so much to support us in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, that went well beyond what people would ever consider to be the role of police officers. And we know that many people left the police force in that time and have not necessarily been replaced. We know that there was particular strain put on our police force, and the support that they need now might be quite different from what they have historically needed. We know that there are parts of our state in the grip of a crime wave at the moment, and we only need to look out the front of this building to see one of those hot spots. There was a reason that the Advertiser described our cultural precinct as North Terror a couple of weeks ago in a front-page headline. Other towns are suffering from that same fear of crime. I visited Port Augusta with the member for Flinders a few weeks ago and sat down with a number of businesses and community leaders who told us tales of significant crime, businesses that had decided to withdraw from the CBD of that important regional city, to close up shop because they were losing too much trade, to people being scared away from the main street, to shoplifting, to broken windows, and a long list of problems that need a quick, rapid and zero-tolerance response, in my view. You can add Ceduna to that list as well. There is a unique wraparound level of policing that is required for the challenges that we're facing with crime at the moment. We can't put our heads in the sand with regard to this. We've got to name it, we've got to respond to it, and we've got to give our police force in South Australia the tools and the resources to be able to deal with crime in this state. We cannot leave it to get to a point where the assaults and cases of verbal abuse spiral to get more serious. Because if that gets more serious, that could result in someone losing their life. We don't want that. It's time to give the South Australian Police the resources that they need to step up, to hit this quickly, and hopefully that problem can be dealt with and they can get back to what they need to be doing. Mr. Speaker, regional South Australia in any given year, depending on the type of season that we have, contributes between $20 and $30 billion to our state's economy. Of course, much of that is in some of those traditional industries that South Australia has done so well in, whether it's food and fibre production or whether it's mining and resources. In more recent times, we've seen the tourism industry step up in regional South Australia because the vast majority of our travel destinations that people come to South Australia to visit, particularly those from interstate and overseas, are found within regional South Australia. Our diverse and beautiful landscape that can be such an attraction to visitors. Our regions provide a contribution to what South Australia is all about. While we are a city-centric state in terms of our population, and the facts just say that, 77% of people living in metropolitan Adelaide, 23% of people living in regional South Australia, our state is defined by our regions. The places, the communities, the people. They contribute so much to making South Australia what South Australia is and to making this state tick. Yes, I mentioned the economic contribution, but it's a cultural contribution as well. And it is an incredibly valuable part of what we're all about as South Australians. There is absolutely no doubt that the budget that was handed down by Labor a couple of weeks ago reverted back to the same old Labor ways of being city-centric in terms of spending. Yes, there's a population here, but in metropolitan Adelaide, but we have to look after our regions. Whether it's providing appropriate levels of funding so that the standard of regional health care can be what regional people expect. And I actually don't think they expect to get the same service that you would get in metropolitan Adelaide. I don't think they're after that. I think they're quite willing to come to metropolitan Adelaide for some services, if supported through the PAT scheme, to be able to do so. But there needs to be a certain standard, and that standard might vary in different parts of this state, but that standard needs to be really clear. If you live in this community, you can expect this. If you live in a particular community, you can expect a doctor. If you live in our third largest city, being Whyalla, you can expect to have a baby locally, which you can't do now. We need to maintain that standard, and whoever is in power needs to set that standard and fight for funding to deliver that standard. And I will be working with the member for Frome, the Shadow Minister for Regional Health Services in South Australia, and the member for Schubert, the Shadow Minister for Health, and each member who represents regional South Australia on our side of the House to define that standard and to make sure a future Liberal government delivers that standard. We know across the state we have a $3 billion backlog in road maintenance, and the vast majority of that is where the vast majority of the roads are, in regional South Australia. We need to get on top of that. And I know that when we were in power, we made massive inroads into the backlog of road maintenance. And as a consequence, our roads are safer today in regional South Australia. But they're not as safe as they could be. And as I said at the beginning of this contribution, I welcome the government's expenditure on road safety campaigns. It's critical. We want to make sure that people get home to their families after a long day at work. We want to make sure when you're travelling through regional South Australia, you reach your destination safe and alive, because we know the heartache and the destruction that comes from losing family members and friends on our roads. And there wouldn't be one person who represents regional South Australia who doesn't know the legacy of road carnage in their families or in their wider circle of friends. When my uncle in rural Scotland was travelling home from school in year 12 as a 17-year-old, he was hit and killed by an oncoming vehicle. My family never, ever recovered from that. My grandparents never recovered from that. They entered the grave early as a consequence of that. And my mum remembers her brother every single day and wonders what sort of life he would have had if he'd got to get married, have a career and have kids. That's what a lack of road maintenance can lead to, and we need to fight for every single dollar we can get for regional South Australia. And the member for Hartley in his role as Shadow Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, and the member for Hammond in his role as the Shadow Minister for Regional Roads will take up that fight relentlessly in our coming months and years in opposition. Mr. Speaker, a quarter of the government's entire regional spend is being directed towards the city of Mount Barker. Now, we welcome that. That community is crying out, as you know more than anyone else, for an appropriate level of spend. But Mount Barker is not a regional community, and I would not begrudge it a single penny or cent of spending. But under the government's own definitions, Mount Barker does not reach the definition of regional. In fact, you can get from Mount Barker to the CBD of Adelaide quicker than you can get from my house in the southern suburbs to the CBD from Adelaide, especially if Tom's driving, says the member for Hartley. I will not respond to his inappropriate interjections. But, Mr. Speaker, this is not to diminish Mount Barker, because your community deserves more expenditure.
My regional community
real regional communities deserve significant expenditure. Because Mount Barker is a future suburb of Adelaide, and it deserves to be given the infrastructure that it deserves. But, quite frankly, regional South Australia's roads, the further you get away from Adelaide, get worse and worse and worse. And perhaps the definition does need to be changed if we're going to call Mount Barker regional. My point is, regional roads, regional healthcare, regional schools, regions, full stop, need to be respected for what they contribute to South Australia's economy, and they need to be invested in accordingly.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, as I close, I want to just reflect on the way that the government behaves. I think when they came to power last year, they shrugged their shoulders and thought, well, the planets have realigned, the 4-year aberration is over, the Liberals will go back to being hopeless, we'll go back to being in government. And that is not my vision for this opposition, and it doesn't appear to be the way they're behaving either. The arrogance is unbelievable, and we all see it every single day. It's locker room arrogance, you know, jobs for the boys, chortling in the front benches, mocking, Twitter insults. It's unbecoming of a government. They don't respect South Australians. They don't respect our regions. Half-time, they don't respect each other. South Australia deserves a lot better.
Hear, hear.
They deserve a lot better from their budget. They deserve a lot better from their ministers. They deserve a lot better from their backbenchers. And the party that I lead, the opposition in South Australia, will work relentlessly to hold them to account, to articulate an alternate vision for the state of South Australia, and to make sure that this state has a suite of ideas across every policy area to consider as we get closer and closer to the 2026 state election. Mr. Speaker, it is a great privilege of mine to be a member of this place. It's a great privilege to be the leader of the opposition. This state needs a good opposition as much as it needs a good government, and that's exactly what we intend to be.
Hear, hear.